let's start our review for trig equations, solving trig equations. And if you remember, the section of the chapter started off talking about finding the inverse function, your sine, cosine, tangent, and even the weird ones, the cosecant, secant, cotangent, of various values. And this led us to how we would finish solving trig equations. So when you're asked for the cosine inverse of negative square root of 3 over 2, you realize that this is in one of two quadrants. It's either going to be a quadrant 1 angle or it's going to be a quadrant 2. If you remember, cosine was the weird one. 1 and 2 is where the inverse function is defined. Right? For sine and for tangent, those inverses, they're defined in 1 and 4. So 1 if it's positive and 2 if it's negative. So x greater than 0. This is the x we're referring to right there. And this is for x less than 0 if it's negative. If it's quadrantal, you have to look at what you have in front of you there. All right, so as far as this is concerned, we're going with quadrant 2. What I said to do is pretend like that negative is not there at all and say, what is the cosine inverse of the square root of 3 over 2? And what you're thinking is, okay, cosine of what value is the square root of 3 over 2? And the answer to that, if you stick with quadrant 1, just saying positive here, only working with quadrant 1, you would say your answer is 30 degrees. Well, 30 degrees for this one. However, we have to go to quadrant 2 and have a reference of 30 degrees because it was actually originally negative. So you just go to quadrant 2, reference of 30 degrees puts you at 150. Which is actually, in terms of radians, 5 pi 6. The directions state exact principal value in both degrees and radians. So I guess our answer is 150. We're talking degrees. 5 pi 6 if we're going with radians. So those would be our answers for the cosine inverse of negative square root of 3 over 2. Okay, letter B over here. Secant inverse of 2. Now again, secant is one of those that it's a little weird. So what we like to do is we say, okay, let's turn this into secant of x equals 2. Secant, we remember, is 1 over cosine. And then as long as we're not setting this equal to 0, which would be a problem, we can take the reciprocal of both of these. So we could say that cosine of x is equal to 1/2. Right? Just taking the reciprocal, but if really you want to go through the paces, it's cross multiply and solve for the cosine of x. You will get cosine of x equals 1/2. So what are we looking at? Well, again, if we're dealing with cosine, it's Q1 for positive, Q2. If it's negative, well, we're dealing with positive 1/2. So cosine of x equals 1/2, that would be either 60 degrees or pi thirds. Arc cosecant of the square root of 2. Again, this arc is nothing more than just a simple cosecant inverse. This is the exact same problem. Let's not make it negative. This would be the exact same problem as what's written here. So this guy, again, not exactly one of our common ones. So let's put it this way. Cosecant of x has to equal the square root of 2. Cosecant is 1 over sine. That's equal to the square root of 2. Either cross multiply, solve for sine, or just take the reciprocal of both sides. You get the sine of x is 1 over the square root of 2, which is root 2 over 2, maybe a little bit more familiar. And that answer, again, we're talking quadrant 1 or 4. And in this case, since we're dealing with positive square root of 2, this will be either 45 degrees or pi fourths, if you're talking radians. All right, down here, letter D, we say arc cotangent -1. Again, we'll say cotangent of x equals -1. That's 1 over tangent equals -1, and then, of course, 1 over tangent is tangent. When you take the reciprocal of -1 is still -1. Now again, cotangent inverse or tangent inverse, it's either quadrant 1 if we're positive, quadrant 4 if we're negative, and when you go to quadrant 4, we just give the negative answer here. Right? So tangent of x equals, pretend this is 1, and that would be 45 degrees. If you throw the negative on there, we'll just say negative 45 degrees, or I-force for our solutions. All right, pretty similar type problem. We'll say cotangent of x equals negative square root of 3. That is 1 over tangent of x equals negative square root of 3, or tangent of x equals, the reciprocal there would be negative 1 over the square root of 3, or negative square root of 3 over 3. Right? As far as tangent is concerned, for a positive version of the square root of 3 over 3, that would be 30 degrees. Since we're going to quadrant 4, we're going to say negative 30 degrees, or negative pi 6. Okay, finally, sine inverse of the negative square root of 3 over 2, that would be sine of x equals negative square root of 3 over 2. And do this one. Again, without the negative, we would say that the answer here would be quadrant 1, and we would say it would be 30 degrees, or excuse me, 60 degrees. Put the negative on, we're talking negative 60 degrees, or negative I-thirds. And that takes care of problem number 1.